everyone. Welcome to She Side Magazine's She Power Special Feature Podcast. This is me, Dr. CV, your host for the day. And to talk about She Side, She Side Magazine is a women's digital magazine as well as a women's platform where successful women huddle together. For knowing more, do visit us at our website, www.shesitemag.com. You can also follow our social media pages and don't forget to subscribe to YouTube channel She Site. Today, in this platform, we bring to you the story of Alana Karen. Alana is the director of search platforms at Google. Yes, you heard it right. She's been at Google for more than 2 decades as a technology leader. Alana Karen is an award-winning tech leader, author, and speaker whose work impacts many of our everyday lives. From Google Search to ads, fiber to Google Grants and beyond, Alana has been leading the charge to develop, scale, build, and drive team and product development that has been rippling the industry impact. Alana has spoken at conferences, summits on technology, leadership, DEI, talent, and innovation. Alana's book, The Adventures of Women in Tech: How We Got Here and Why We Stay, aggravates hundreds of stories on these topics. Recently, she also published a follow-up workbook which helps women to navigate their journey in technology. Let's put our hands together and welcome Miss Alana Karen to She Site podcast. Hi, Alana. It's really wonderful to meet you and to get to know you, to introduce you to the She Site audience today. Let's get started with your journey as a tech leader. You are definitely an inspiration for women, young girls, and women who are looking for a career in tech. And you have what actually personally inspired me is that you started off at a very, entry level position, that too with a major in history. I am really excited to know how you are navigating the tech world and how did you reach to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to joke that I was in college and university with like no hope of making any money at all.
Mhm.
I was studying history. I did creative writing. I could have minored in French, but I didn't. like just like no sign that I would be anything but like I don't know, teaching or which is a valuable profession, but obviously not super lucrative. But around the to really date myself, it was like the late 90s. And so right as I was studying at university, I was seeing the rise of the internet as a
Mm.
vehicle for information and communication.
Yeah.
And because I was sort of more of a creative type, what I really liked about it was how you could like make these web pages and
Mhm.
with just like changes on a couple keys, you could entirely change the color of the page. You could change how it looked and what the information was there, and I just loved the capabilities to do that. And so I ended up focusing a lot of my own personal time teaching myself HTML, teaching myself how to tinker with some JavaScript, and doing various internships at school, some which were not even supposed to involve the web, but I just helped them make their website, and some which were much more technology based. And I sort of talked myself into them. Wasn't really sure how I would turn it into a career. But
Mhm.
ultimately, as I was wrapping up college, my university was looking for a webmaster.
Mm.
And so I went full campaign portfolio
Mm.
on them
Okay.
and talked my way in. So
Wow.
that was my entry. Could it happen today without a CS degree? Like
Exactly.
opportunities, but it was one of those technological shifts
Mm.
that happen every so often, and I sort of was right place, right time.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Of course, you shared your story of becoming the webmaster of your university. That's perfectly fine. After that, what happened?
It was a
How did you
pretty
land
like
your job in Google per se?
yeah, totally. I mean, I had two jobs before Google. Both were pretty much grunt work type jobs. While it sounds fancy to say you were the webmaster, I mean, really what that was just revamping very bad websites that had been thrown together over the years
Yeah.
and doing all the legwork to get them to look consistent and beautiful in a new sort of
Mm.
shape, size, everything in line with what the dean and the dean's office and the rest of the college was comfortable with you doing.
Mm.
And so I think it started to teach me how do you merge this idea of what you can do technically with how you would actually work with stakeholders to bring it to life.
Mm.
And so as I was wrapping up a first major like overhaul,
Mm.
I decided to move out to the Bay Area and find my first like real .com gig, again to date myself, late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah.
And got into a startup doing account management because I basically said, okay, I don't really want to do this like behind the scenes. I'm not going to become an engineer.
Mm.
What about if I worked with clients? And so that was a startup that didn't last for long, but I got to experiment with lots of different things at that company
Mhm.
so that when it ultimately was failing and I was laid off,
Mm.
I applied to Google and got an entry level job at Google.
Yeah.
And so I think, not sure if everyone would learn the same thing from my career, but like I do think in those early years it was much more about skill collecting
Mm.
and not being so worried about title and upward momentum
Mm.
as much as really getting good at sort of a boot camp of skills.
Yeah.
How do you work with other people? How do you bring a project to life? What do you do when something goes wrong? What do you do when they like your work? What do you do when they don't like your work?
Yeah.
Right? So like some of it almost very soft skill in nature and
Mm.
like getting sort of bruises and cuts so that then you can finesse
Yeah.
and not being so worried that every opportunity was completely upward.
Mm.
Um, and I wasn't making a ton of money anyway, but when I went from the first startup to Google,
Mhm.
I took quite the pay cut to get in the door at Google,
Mm.
again at an entry level customer service role.
Yeah.
But I felt like, oh, wait, here's a company that has a model that makes money durably, which was
Mm.
sort of lacking at the startup. And
Yeah.
so go ahead and do that. You're going to learn stuff here.
Correct. Mm. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
So I had the experience and they let me in.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure when you joined Google, Google was not this big anyway, right?
No, it was probably less than 300 people.
Yeah.
And obviously now we're like over 100,000,
So how does it
under
feel? How does
200,000
it
over.
feel to see the company that you joined grow to such a big power in the world today?
How did it feel? I mean, it was interesting. Like I think sometimes you just didn't even realize it was happening.
Yeah.
But sometimes you would have these moments where you would look around and be like, oh wow, look what they did. Look what we did. Like, isn't this impressive?
Yeah.
And I personally have liked the journey of seeing how the company tackles different stages of growth and different moments in the world and what's needed, but not all of those have been easy.
Correct.
And
Yeah.
I don't think everyone would like
Mm.
going from startup to medium-sized company to large company to like very large company. Not everyone liked all of those stages, and many people have left Google
Mm.
because of that or joined Google because they like the later stages and don't like the early stages.
Mm.
So I personally have loved almost like an anthropological experiment,
Mm.
seeing how the organization must change as these things become true. But there's definitely been hard times as well as
Mm.
going through that live and knowing like what worked before doesn't work now, and you need to revisit everything you assumed would be okay.
Right. Totally, totally. Absolutely loved your point of when you are a startup and from a startup to a scale up, and what we are talking about a scale up in Google is like 10x probably or 100x in every year. I don't know. The pace of growth, the pace of people joining in, and the kinds of
Mm,
attitude, cultural, adaptation that is required. I think It's huge. And as you rightly said, not everybody can handle that situation. Some of them might leave, but some people would like to adapt. And that brings me to the question, how can someone in leadership build the competencies, and what are the competencies needed to work in that kind of a fast-paced, agile, environment, to navigate all these huge changes happening every now and then?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there's full on trainings at Google about how you navigate change.
Mm.
um, because it's just so common.
Yeah.
And to find some durability and be able to still lock into a plan amongst constant change can feel really difficult sometimes. I think that if I think about capabilities or sort of talents, I think that the really good leaders I've seen have been able to really figure out their North Star and
Mm.
have a clear core
Mm.
of what they're driving to.
Mm.
And so things around the core could change, but you know where you're going.
Yeah.
And you, secondly, communicate that really well to your team. You
Yeah.
keep the team focused on that core. You repeat the message.
Mm.
You continually to contextualize for people what they're seeing in the world around them and how that fits with your core. And I think where I've seen teams or leaders lose their way is not either finding that core and defining it well enough
Mm.
or getting really distracted.
Yeah.
I think the last piece, and a piece that I really felt was near and dear to my heart, but I've seen different approaches from leaders, is just like, then how do you think about having the best talent
Mm.
that can achieve that for you? How do you, like, what's your hiring philosophy? What's your growth philosophy, both for their individual growth, but for overall team growth? And do you early enough think of that as something you should really invest in, both
Mm.
your people and their growth, but also how much you focus on hiring, how deliberate you are in those decisions? Because
Mm.
I found that those things are very foundational. If you do it right, you have way less worries
Correct.
come a year later, 2 years later, because the people you hired are now taking the strategy that you said was the North Star
Mm.
and they are going,
Yeah.
they're doing it.
Mm.
And you may have to unblock them or help them or whatnot, but you're not dealing with fundamental issues where you don't have the right talent or the talent isn't focused on the right things.
Um, I think the way you explain things, I can already see that Google has a culture of nurturing a lot of intrapreneurs, or how do we call them? Like people who are entrepreneurial within the organization, and people like you who are able to take that kind of a leadership where you know your North Star and you want to bring in people who can join that journey. So that's precisely probably what happens even in a startup, right? Or in any business.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I do think that you have to, there probably is another component advertised that is a complexity of a very large company that is different from a startup. So, if I didn't bring this up, I would be maybe shortchanging this, and you would come in and you would be very surprised
Mm.
by at Google just how much cross team partnership,
Mm.
how much negotiation, how much alignment
Mm.
you are. It is not like being a solo entrepreneur with a
Yeah,
single vision
correct.
that you
Yeah.
can achieve single-handedly. There
Mm.
is so much
Mm.
that you're going to need that infrastructure org to help you provide, that trust and safety org to help you with the compliance of your product,
Mm.
that legal team to help you make sure that you are right. Like you are not holding all the components and hiring for all the functions yourself. You
Mm.
often are cross partnering. And your product, if you're a product like Chrome, which is a browser, you may find out that something you did in your browser is impacting how search shows up,
Yeah.
right? And so the need to work between these groups
Oops, yeah.
that are their own
Mm.
often could be large companies on their own.
Mm.
And you just assuming, oh, it'll just work out if I ping someone, right?
Yeah.
Like it you could sometimes be falsely led to think like, oh, this isn't like a corporate negotiation. I don't need to get good at corporate, you know, partnerships. But
Yeah.
like really, when you're part of a big company,
Mhm.
it's probably going to be inherent to your leadership role.
I mean, that's definitely there if you're talking when you're working in a larger organization that bureaucracy or whatever you call it, we have to navigate that. And that brings me to the question of women leadership. And do you, at any time as a woman leader, have you faced specific challenges in getting things done? I know by your career growth that it is not, but still, do you think generally women leaders in such large or even smaller organization face impediments to their growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible to say no to that. Like, of course, there have been things along the way. We know much more now how much unconscious bias plays a part in our day to day and how much people, I'm a relatively short,
Mm.
cute sized woman.
Yeah.
um, how much do you sort of immediately believe me and think of me as a leader when
Yes.
I walk in a room versus a taller man? We
Mm.
know there's differences across race. We know there's differences across cultures. We know lots of things play into these impressions and how we process them, which means that certain people may get buy in faster than I do, or I may have to prove myself longer to the people in the room that I, in fact, know my stuff when other people would assume, oh, this person knows their, they just would assume.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's impossible for me to say how much that happened.
Yeah.
Also, how much it happened because I joined Google relatively young.
Yeah.
So, how much I just came across
Mm.
early in my career as youthful, and therefore people didn't believe me or take me as seriously. I was also overall less technical in a technical company,
Mm.
which, by the way, can heavily matrix with gender
Mm.
because of the study rates in STEM of
Mm.
women versus men. So sometimes these things are hard to tease out. How much of this happened because I was this, or that?
Mm.
It can be hard to know.
Yeah.
Um, Generally, because I was in a company that believed in meritocracy,
Mm.
I do think that overall I was able to grow.
Mm.
And I got into leadership and management fairly early in my career at Google. So I don't think overall it held me back. At that time, I was in a women led team,
Yeah.
and I do think that that helped.
Mm.
And I was on the operations side, which gender wise was heavily female,
Mm.
versus engineering, which was less so. So I think that that helped as well.
Mm.
And I think those two things that I achieved, those two things in
Mm.
a woman led operations team early on, have fueled the rest of my career. That then people were willing to take bets on me because I'd already achieved that early on. I don't have a lot of nightmare moments to share with people, though.
Yeah.
It was
That's
more
really.
quiet
Mm.
because it wasn't such outward, I'm not going to listen to you because you're a girl.
Okay.
No, it's just more like, oh, I left a lot of meetings thinking it was my fault that they didn't listen to me.
Got it.
And now I realize, no, it's probably a larger cultural thing.
Mm.
Now,
That's.
the
Mm.
pro of me thinking it was me
Mm.
was that I got better and better.
Mm.
I kept working on myself because I thought it was me.
No, that's a very important message that you have given. So many times, when especially women, they face certain biases or cultural or these kinds of subtle rejections, they tend to take it too personal and then quit. Instead, what you did is you took it personal, probably, but you worked on it and made sure that you can go to the next step. I think that's the what do you call message I would like the audience to take.
We talk a ton about nowadays the grit, the perseverance that people need, um, gender absent, but the cross genders that people need to really thrive in their careers. And it's this muscle to get back up
Mm.
when you fall.
From your story, I also wanted to touch upon, you mentioned that you were earlier in a women-led team, and I think it was Cheryl, right? Cheryl Sandberg.
Yes, under Sheryl Sandberg's leadership. Yep.
And you also mentioned that there were a couple of women, and you have been vocal about both Cheryl as well as Susan Wojcicki, and
Mm.
one more person I read in your book, someone who championed for you. So, would you like to talk about when you have women leaders or mentors or someone to champion for you? What is the relevance of that? And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I will say that I think like it doesn't have to be gender, but I do think like you could have these champions across
yeah,
genders.
sure, 100%. Yeah.
But I do think that having had role models early on who were strong women leaders, it did give me a bigger sense of what was possible.
Mm.
And and it wasn't as hard to picture that I could be in a role of leadership.
Mm.
I don't think I actually ever looked at Cheryl and thought I would be Cheryl. she was quite impressive. Um, but but I do think I thought like, oh, I can have power,
Yeah.
right? I can have authority. I can manage people, right? Like you saw examples of it in front of you.
Mm.
Um, yeah, you're probably not remembering because she's not as famous. She's not famous at all. But I do speak in my book about a woman named Lorna who took a chance on me when I was in college and gave me an internship that she usually didn't give
Yes.
second years.
Yeah. Universe.
And and yeah, and I think like that was one of the many times in my life where I've talked my way into something and just convinced people that I was worth betting on. And it doesn't work. You have to do the work
Mm.
to tee yourself up, which I think a lot of us are actually kind of trained out of as women.
Yes. Yeah.
We're trained to just kind of sit, be quiet. They'll crown me if I'm good enough.
Mm.
And I think,
Not just that, even women who are trying to be vocal or trying to, as you said, uh, talk into something, they are being shamed as well. They would be
yes,
considered
yes.
as
And then it's
oh,
reinforced, of
yeah.
course. It's reinforced. Absolutely. And so I think that it really does. You have to do it to in a way, it's like selling, right? You have to knock on a bunch of doors to see who answers the door. And you have to go out there and see who's going to bet, who is it going to click with. Not every relationship works. And so just to take a step back, that's what we talk about as sponsorship. Sponsorship being someone sees something in you that they want to foster, and therefore they invite you into rooms that you wouldn't otherwise be part of. They tell you about opportunities, they introduce you to people, they broaden your horizons by sharing information or poking at you when you're limiting yourself. But the point is, they see something that provokes something in them where they will spend the time on you. And I think that it can be hard to know how to get a sponsor because, like any relationship, it's only half you.
Yeah.
But going out there and making the connections with people and being really deliberate with their time and what you want from them and showcasing what you're good at lets people start to see how they might click in with you. And some of these relationships are only close for a period of time. I would say I was closest with Cheryl in those early years where she was at Google. We keep in touch, and I know I can go to her for career advice if I need it. But some are lifelong. And so you have to kind of just see, like any relationship, it can ebb and flow. But I think seeing those examples early on not only helped me, but it helped me realize that I wanted to do that too for others. I don't know that the book would exist today, me writing a book showcasing the stories of other women so women would feel like they belonged in tech. I don't know that if it would exist if I hadn't had those early examples.
Brilliant. So since you opened at the topic of book, let's talk about that. And how did you, I mean, of course, based on your experience, and suddenly you decided that you want to showcase and write about women in tech, adventures of women in tech. I mean, what is that moment of realization that you want to write, and how did you approach the project?
You know how hard it is to write a book,
I
and
know.
why you would even want to is a huge question mark. um,
I mean, it's a great book. It's a great contribution, I would say, for especially women
Thank
who
you.
are
I
aspiring.
think so too.
Yeah, yeah. But
It's
you're already in a good position in a technology company, managing teams and big, responsibility and
already busy.
yeah,
Yeah.
very.
Yeah. It's called The Adventures of Women in Tech, Why We Got Here, or How We Got Here and Why We Stay. And in the book jacket, it starts off by saying Alana Karen was annoyed.
Mm,
And it is true. It was 2018, and I was seeing so many headlines. It
mhm,
wasn't one, it was almost like a symptom of headlines across late 2018 and early 2019 that had really sexy headlines, really like eye-grabbing headlines like, can women thrive in tech?
mm,
Should women stay in tech?
mm.
And
And
I
who are
was
giving these titles?
surrounded.
Who are giving these titles? Oh my God, how sad.
I was it was so annoying. It was so deeply annoying because I was surrounded by women
Mhm.
who were having meaningful careers in tech,
Yeah.
who were making a lot of good money,
Mhm.
who were continuing to have opportunity. And it wasn't that it wasn't hard. Yes, there were things that were hard, but that didn't mean that a whole generation of women, maybe coming out of high school, coming out of college, women thinking about making a move into tech, should not join, should see these headlines and feel like they wouldn't belong, that they couldn't belong.
Mm,
And the source of a lot of this was well meaning, meaning that there were studies that showed that maybe women attrited at faster rates than men, that they were having X or Y experience. And a lot was coming out as part of the hashtag Me Too movement as well.
mm,
But to me, the headline should be like, everyone, all women join tech.
mm.
Like, if you really wanted to change the game, you would have more women join. You wouldn't be like, oh, sounds like it's tough there, ladies. Like, I just was enraged.
Yeah.
And in my career too, I think I was at this moment where I just really felt like I could make a difference.
Mm,
And I had this idea for a book,
mm,
and I call it Google hubris that
mm.
I learned there, but like a sort of very much like, well, why not me?
Yeah.
Like, I can do it. I can write a book. But I will say that I always liked writing.
Mm,
Writing's come easily to me. I said I studied creative writing. Like I've been a writer by nature. So for me, I think that was the medium that I locked into. Other women might have a similar feeling, but they might start a podcast.
yeah.
Other women might have a feeling and be more into mentoring, which I have done as well. But like, you could take these impulses and do them different ways.
Mm,
I think for me, it was just the time where I had this idea of like, I'm not seeing the book I want to see.
mm.
A lot of the books I'm seeing talk about women who made it to the tippy top.
Yeah.
But I know when I talk to women around me that they don't feel like they recognize themselves in those women.
Mm,
So, what if I interviewed people from all different paths, non-technical roles in tech, technical roles in tech, different backgrounds getting into tech, some technical, some like mine, some where they found their ways into specific roles like legal in tech or whatever it is. And, what if I were to do that and make a book where hopefully most people picking it up could see themselves in some of these stories? What would that look like? So, yeah, I just got really annoyed. I guess that's the secret to me getting things done.
You will be surprised. I was also annoyed for not getting featured in a prominent media back many years ago, and that's how I launched She Site. So the annoyance helps.
See?
So in your book, you have mentioned very interesting words like likability and bro culture. Can you give us some tips about how women can navigate such situations?
Yeah, I when I was interviewing women, there were various stories that would come up, or women would even say, "Are you going to talk about this?"
Mhm.
And so there were a couple topics I deep dived into. One of them being the likability problem, which is talked about elsewhere. So this again, like, is not groundbreaking at all. But there is a lot of evidence and research and studies that women are held at a higher likability expectation
Yeah.
than men are.
Mhm.
And this shows up in lots of ways, but often means that we have to soften how we talk to people. If we were as direct as some gentlemen, we would be told we were being harsh.
Yeah. Arrogant.
And yeah, yeah. And this can be exacerbated even more by certain other intersections. Black women are often told they're yelling at people. So, like, there can be these additional things that layer on and exacerbate this. And it's a real paradox, right? Like, how are you going to be a leader if you have to be likable all the time? The whole point is that, like, you aren't, like always going to be likable as a leader. And we see that this often in political elections or other types of leadership decisions can hold women back
Yeah.
because they will really be dinged for something that comes across as not likable. You'll even see it with just like how media criticizes actors versus actresses,
Yeah.
right? You'll see it show up in lots of places, right? Like, and underneath it all. And by the way, this isn't men doing it to women.
Yeah.
Women ding
And
women
also,
for
yeah,
likability.
true. I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely. All
it's
the time. It is like societally baked in.
exactly. So that's why we call it patriarchy or the societal conditioning that we are talking about. It's not limited to the men. I mean, it's a system. It's a conditioning that we have been brought
Yes.
into.
It's really in line with how we're raised as women in most societies
Yeah.
to take care of the we, to
Mm.
grow up and be the caretakers, the nurturers of groups, and to have less focus on the I.
Mm.
And so when you're then in the business world,
That is it.
and there's going to be aspects where, in fact, it's very I focused. There's going to be aspects where you need to advocate for your team
Mm.
and you need to figure out how to balance that kind of I we sense of when you say your team is great at something, right? Like, is that you complimenting a team or is that you complimenting yourself, right? So, like, there's all this stuff that then you hit work
Mm.
and it starts to become a problem because most of us can make it through education and, in fact, excel
Mm.
because women are typically more focused and heads down and behave.
Yeah.
Typically, it is a stereotype. Um, so we tend to excel in education, and then it's not until we're getting into our career, maybe 5 years in, and we're starting to see that the men are getting leadership roles ahead of us, that we run into this kind of like, well, are we not talking about ourselves enough? But how can we talk about ourselves and not come across unlikable?
Yeah.
Um, but I think generally the trend is that inclusive leaders who truly know how to motivate people and who pay attention to team dynamics and group dynamics do better.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's talk about a little more of technology and being working in such a, I mean, the world's number one technology company. I cannot stop myself from asking, how do you predict the future of technological world is going to be? And are you a optimist or a pessimist when it comes to the application of technology, AI, and other things? There's a lot of things that's happening.
I tend to think I'm a realist, which means I'm a pessimist.
Okay.
Pessimists always say that they're realists. But in AI, I feel like I am a very positive version of it. Um, because, and maybe it's because I'm so close to it that I, first of all, don't have as much fear as other people have about what it might do or how quickly it might do it. Um, it fundamentally requires right now intense effort to train it. And it is, I don't want to call it dumb because obviously it can be extremely smart, but it requires the training.
Yeah.
Like it is not spontaneously doing arithmetic even correctly. You could train it that 1 + 1 = 3 and it would tell you 3. So I think that some of the fears that people have are overblown, or at least will take longer than, the job replacement worries and whatnot that people have.
Mm.
I think it is there are things that have been extremely difficult and inefficient for humans to do that technology can be trained to do better. And I think that will be revolutionary for humanity. If you look at what already we see that these technologies can do for the medical field in terms of detecting abnormalities in mammograms faster and more effectively than humans can do, trained technicians can do.
Yeah, I read about that.
I mean, if you just think about that impact, and does that put those trained technicians out of a job? Unlikely. They can move on to more improved
Yeah.
ways.
With those technologies, the efficiency and the scale of operations can improve for these technicians, for these,
Exactly. 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 And you could now return results faster
yeah,
than you used to be able to. People are sitting there maybe with cancer and you can get to them faster
correct, exactly.
versus us thinking like, oh, it puts people out of a job.
Mm.
I do think there might be some very low level tasks,
Mhm.
but I don't know that that means that you're unemploying as many people as you are going to be able to upskill and use them for better things. So I think we'll have to see where some of that plays out. But I think that there's a lot of optimism that it can actually take humanity out of some of the things that they either weren't able to do or weren't doing effectively, and really change the game in terms of what it's available for.
If I were to ask you, like, tell me five technology or emerging technologies that will shape the world in the next 5 years or 10 years.
Oh, this is interesting. I don't feel like anyone's asked me exactly
I
this
mean, based on
question.
your
And I don't
experience.
know if I have five.
Okay.
Um, there has been something interesting where over the 20 years I was at Google, the fact that computing was getting cheaper and faster
Yeah.
led to so much scale. Those gains, those that sort of multiplicative effect has diminished.
Mm.
And so I do think it will be interesting where technology goes next on that. Um, and right now, you do see a lot of expense and money going towards the machines needed to do the machine learning calculations.
Yeah.
Sort of interested in that space too. We often think about the software. I'm also typically a lot of the true gains have been powered by hardware
Mm.
efficiencies and changes that like not everyone pays attention to. So I would just watch that space.
Yep.
Um, Regulation is a very interesting, like we don't often think about, I mean, I think if you're not in technology, you probably don't often think about how regulation shapes what users have access to.
Mhm.
But we are seeing a huge rise in local, state, country regulatory practices that can really shape what users ultimately see, how their data is used, what permissions they have to do. And that behind the scenes can fundamentally change what companies are able to produce. And both pros, where hopefully most of the regulation is not meant to squelch innovation, it is meant to squelch things that would be bad for their citizens.
Yeah. And
So
also
it's meant
to
to
eliminate
protect
bias.
citizens.
Mm.
Um, but it can have a chilling effect.
Mm.
So, again, very interesting space. I can't say it's like, I can't say I have predictions on it. I
Mm.
think it will lead to standards in some places, which are much better for users.
Yeah.
I do think, however, it will make some things that would have been beneficial for users harder to do, or it may require more steps for those users to be able to achieve those, and that may be sort of a learning curve that's hard for users.
Mm. Conversation somewhere you mentioned that growing up you didn't come with money and you actually had that spirit to work, or rather you gained your ambition or you became ambitious because of that spirit and upbringing. um, what do you think are do women generally have this apprehension or concern when it comes to financial independence, and what is that message that you would want to give to women, especially someone who is now thinking that, no, I cannot do anything in life, I don't have money, I'm like, if somebody is in that position, what is that advice you would like to give her?
I think that sometimes we don't realize what's possible just by taking the first steps. I think sometimes we compare ourselves to a movie star and we're like, well, I could never be that, so I'll just won't do anything. And same, like I compare myself to a CEO. I can't be that. So I might as well do nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just a false assumption. That's like, you probably don't realize what even a little bit of money in savings, how that changes your point of view. So I think we don't realize what just a little bit of money in savings can do for us.
Yes.
And so we don't start at all. We make daily decisions where we're just like, well, we can't be rich, so we'll just keep spending, just satisfy our in the moment needs.
Mm.
And I think what's really interesting is that I didn't start out with ambition. Like I probably still to this day don't much have as much ambition as others because I just wasn't raised thinking like, oh, I need to like always be thinking of the next thing. No, it's just like very much like day-to-day survival.
Mm.
And over time, when I started to save money and realize, oh, I could move across the country and take this risk.
Mm.
Oh, I don't have to find a job right away. I'll wait a month or two and get the best job. Like, oh, it would be possible if I had to take a break from working. And like, what would that look like? Right? Like, you just start to open yourselves up to choices. And I think that that's really what people need to know is financial independence isn't about being rich all of a sudden. It's about having more options.
Mm.
And you don't even know what those options will be because that is future optionality.
Mm.
But sometimes this is really important to women, right? They're in a relationship, they stay in the relationship because they don't have financial independence.
Yeah.
So you don't know, like, I guess what I would just tell everyone is like, get a little bit in the bank, have some savings, right? Like, you just don't know what it'll mean
Some
until
do
you've
not
got
even
it.
have, some do not even have bank accounts in
Just I swear I know, and I know, listen, like an international audience probably listens to this, and there are different perspectives on banking and savings and all of this type of thing, and it will mean different in different places, but to the degree it's relevant, I can just say it really will change your perspective. And
100%.
even if all it does is it doesn't change your ambition in your career, but it allows you to take a better vacation every 2 years, it still
Yeah.
contributes to your overall well being in a way that probably will pay dividends at your day job. So I'm just huge on it. I love a little money in the bank. I love a lot of money in the bank, preferably.
Yeah.
Um, and I probably hoard it because I was raised without money. So my husband would say that I'm like loath to spend, loath to invest because I'm just like, let me count my coins. So I don't know that you have to go that far, but I will say that as I left essentially a pretty poor background, I don't like to say poverty because we weren't there, but just very much more survival mode, and got into an environment where I had some cushion, the options I felt and how that changed my point of view about what was possible.
Yeah.
And then that idea that more is possible than what you limit yourself to did, in fact, come into my career. And then the fact that I was at a place like Google that thought that way too really then fostered how I thought about it personally. So you really can start to see some payoff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Alana. It has been really fascinating to listen to a tech leader. Again, I know what I'm going to say might sound stereotypical, but most of the technologists or tech persons that we come across are bros who only talk tech jargons, whereas you are talking everything about, people, leadership, and empathy, and so many other things. It's really
It's
fascinating.
true.
Yeah.
It's true. So if you're sitting there thinking, I don't look like a tech bro, I can't go to tech. Been at Google 23 years,
Yeah.
you can do it.
Yes, exactly. And that's precisely what we wanted to share to our audience. Thank you so much for joining in this podcast of She Power special feature by She Site Magazine. And I look forward to keeping in touch and learning and, encouraging more women in STEM.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Before you move on to the next video, I have a request to make. If you like this video and this podcast, if you gain some valuable information out of this video, I would request you to click on the subscribe button as well as follow us on our social media pages. The links are given in our description. Also, do sign up to our website, www.shesitemag.com. We have amazing women stories as well as various women initiatives that are getting launched in the coming months. I'll see you there.